The wind on the frontier carried more than just dust. It carried the weight of their silence. They called it the frontier, as if it were just a line on a map. But for the women who lived there, it was a battlefield made of hunger, isolation, and endless waiting. They didn't wear armor. They wore linen, torn at the edges from years of wind and grief. Their hands weren't soft. They were the hands that built America. One blister, one prayer at a time. History remembers the cowboys, the outlaws, the soldiers. But it rarely remembers her name. And yet, she was the one who kept the fire burning when the world went dark. These are the harsh truths of her life. She woke before the sun and never saw it rise for herself. Each day began in the freezing dark, not by choice, but because survival doesn't wait for sleep. The frost clung to her breath as she milked the cow, fed the animals, and boiled water for the men who'd be remembered in history books. She worked in the shadows so that others could live in the light. By the time the sun finally painted the sky, she barely looked up. There was no time for beauty when the price of life was constant motion. Loneliness wasn't just a feeling, it was the very air she breathed. The frontier wasn't silent. It was filled with the howls of predators, the creaks of the cabin, and the relentless sound of her own heartbeat. Her nearest neighbor could be 20 miles away across treacherous land. If something went wrong, there was no one to hear her scream. If someone died, she often had to dig the grave herself, her own tears mixing with the unforgiving soil. At night, she'd whisper prayers not just out of faith, but out of a deep-seated fear of what the silence might bring. She didn't own her life. The land did. It dictated every moment of her day, when to plant, when to harvest, when to bleed, and when to rest. Even her own body felt like it belonged to the land. She gave birth between chores, sometimes alone, wrapping her newborn in whatever scrap of cloth wasn't soaked in sweat or dirt, and went right back to work before her tears could even dry. No one called it strength back then. They simply called it duty. The most violent storms didn't come from the sky. They came from inside. Extreme isolation does strange things to the human mind. It eats your laughter first, then your hope, then the very sound of your own voice. Some women, it said, forgot how to speak altogether. Others spoke only to ghosts they conjured from memory. The frontier could break a person in half, and then make them feel ashamed for being shattered. Death was ordinary. It was a constant, unwelcome neighbor. Children were taken by fevers that today we cure with a simple pill. Husbands vanished on hunting trips, never to return. Starving animals sometimes turned on their owners. She learned not to cry, because crying wasted water, and water was life. Every grave she dug made her a little older, until her own reflection in a pail of water looked like a stranger she used to know. And yet, she carried love like a secret weapon. On the frontier, love wasn't soft or poetic. It was something fierce you hid under your ribs, something that hurt to hold but would hurt far more to lose. She wrote letters she wasn't sure would ever be read, to men who might never return, each word a promise sealed with mud and memory. Hunger taught her a terrible patience. When the crops failed and the pantry was bare, she learned to make soup from bone dust and old leather. She baked bread from whatever she could grind, sometimes tree bark, sometimes just hope. Every bite she gave to her family instead of taking for herself was an act of quiet, desperate defiance against a world trying to starve her out. Her faith was practical, grounded in the earth, not the heavens. God wasn't in a distant, gilded church. He was in the well water that didn't freeze over in January, in the sound of a baby that finally stopped coughing through the night, in the cow that somehow survived the brutal winter. She prayed not for a place in heaven, but simply for the strength to see another sunrise. Beauty was dangerous. A simple ribbon in her hair could get her judged by the few people she saw. A smile deemed too bright could spark malicious rumors. A colorful dress could make her a target. So she learned to hide her softness, burying it under layers of dirt and a hardened expression. Her strength became a shield for her spirit. Her name rarely outlived her grave. When she died, the rough wooden marker might just say wife or mother, or more often than not, nothing at all. No story, no legacy, no photo. But the walls of every log cabin she helped build, every field she helped clear, still carry her invisible fingerprints, silent evidence that she existed and that she mattered more than anyone ever acknowledged. The cold could kill faster than grief. She slept beside the fire not for her own comfort, but to keep her children from freezing in the night. Sometimes she'd wake up, her own body numb, and realize one of them hadn't. Winter was a merciless predator that didn't care about prayers or tears. Letters were her only proof that a world existed beyond her isolated patch of dirt. Every page she wrote was a piece of her soul, sent across hundreds of miles of nothingness. She'd pour her hopes, her fears, her entire heart into the ink, seal it with wax, and then wait months, sometimes years, for an answer that might never come. Some women waited a lifetime. She was invisible in her own story. History wrote about the men who tamed the West, who built the nation. But she was the one who kept it alive. She wasn't in the newspapers or the town records, but she was in the steady, resilient heartbeat of every single settlement that survived its first brutal years. Her silence was louder than war. When she lost a child or a husband, she didn't collapse. She didn't scream. She just went back to work. Because the animals still needed feeding. Because the bread still needed to rise. Because the living still needed her. Grief was a luxury she simply couldn't afford. Hope was the most dangerous and the most necessary thing she owned. It kept her alive, but it also broke her heart 1,000 times over. She hoped for rain during a drought. She hoped for a letter from home. She hoped for peace. And time again, she learned that hope doesn't always save you. But she hoped anyway. Every scar was a story she never told. Burns from the cast iron stove, deep cuts from farming tools, the permanent marks of childbirth. Her body was a living diary that no one ever took the time to read. Each scar was a sacred, unspoken testament to her struggle and her survival. And yet, surrounded by death, she still planted flowers. Even in the harshest, rockiest soil, she would carve out a small space to make beauty grow. A single, stubborn marigold by the cabin door wasn't just a flower. It was an act of rebellion. It was a declaration that even here, in this desolate place, softness was a form of survival. She built a nation that never bothered to say thank you. Her endless work was invisible. Her profound sacrifices were simply assumed. Her incredible strength was misinterpreted as quiet compliance. Yet every thriving field, every small town, every humble church stood on the foundation of her refusal to fall. She wasn't waiting for a rescue. She was the rescue. When the men left for war, for gold, or for good, she was the one who held everything together: the land, the children, and the fragile flicker of hope. Her quiet, relentless endurance was the true bedrock of a new nation. The land took everything from her: her youth, her health, her children, and often gave nothing back but dust and heartache. Still, she stayed. Because leaving meant abandoning everything she had built with her own bare hands. The earth may have been cruel, but it was hers, and she wouldn't let it forget her name. The final truths weren't written down. They lived in the way she stared at the horizon, in the way her hands trembled but never stopped moving, in the way her children learned how to survive just by watching her breathe. These were the truths no one recorded, the ones buried under time, beneath the lonely sound of the wind sweeping across empty fields. She isn't in our textbooks. She isn't in the famous songs. But she was the heartbeat behind every dusty road, every family farm, every single generation that came after. The world remembers the men who explored the frontier. But the women? They were the frontier. Thank you for watching. If their stories echo with you, don't let their voices fade. please consider subscribing to our channel to help keep their memories, and the memories of countless others like them, alive.